Welcome everybody. Day 2 of our mini February boot camp for class of 2024 students and families. And I know we also had some overachievers yesterday. We had some younger families, which is great. We have some class 2023 families trying to figure out if there's any tidbits to pick up at the finish line here.
I love it.
Today might not be the day for that, right? Hopefully you got some value yesterday. You'll get some more on Friday. But again, I think that's few and far between. And no, we had an awesome day yesterday. So hopefully you guys got some value. Welcome to the new folks. We're excited to have you. I'm really excited for today. I think there's going to be a ton that you're going to learn in the next hour or so here. And yeah, we're psyched about it on our end. Couple housekeeping things before we do some introductions and then dive into what you guys all tuned in here for today. But all of these are being recorded. Okay. So everybody's going to get these recordings. Specifically next Tuesday, we're going to package up all 4 days and have them in one place for you all. So you can have the recordings, the slide decks, any supporting information, some unique coupon codes, things like that, promotions that our partners are running here. So rest assured, you will be getting that. We love the participation. So please, the Q&A is going to be welcomed. And I think it's always a fun way. If you would just share with us where you're at in the country and the graduating student or the graduating class of your student. We're always interested to know where everybody's tuning in from. We had almost all 50 states represented yesterday. I like seeing Iowa right out of the gate.
I love it, yeah.
We don't get a ton of Iowa here. So as you guys can see here, we're very well represented geographically, which is always, I think, fun for us. A couple in our backyards here. We're me and Rob up here in the Northeast, and we got Lily down there in San Antonio. And again, we're pretty well represented across the board. And the other thing here is for Rob and Lily too. We actually have a decent amount of school counselors that are tuning in with us this week too to see what they can learn for their schools and for their students. I think that's a pretty cool thing too. Okay, great. So without further ado, I will quickly introduce myself and College Aid Pro, and then I'll introduce our friends from the Princeton Review, and we'll get cooking. But my name is Matt Carpenter. I'm one of the founders at College Aid Pro. I personally have been doing this for about 20 years. I love what I do. That's trying to help families figure out an affordable path to college, right? And the really cool thing is, and we say this every day, is that everybody has one. I don't care if you have very few resources, if you have a lot of resources, if you're somewhere in the middle, good student, average student, everybody has a path. But the huge challenge is it's not obvious. And it's not easy to navigate this process that's so layered. So that's why we like to provide a ton of education. And we have a software that supports the experts on our team. And we have partners that help fill the voids, right? We don't do everything. And for that stuff we don't do, we like to bring in the best, who we consider to be the best folks in the industry. And when it comes to test prep and AP prep, and I think a Princeton Review is really, if it's not on Mount Rushmore, it's certainly on Mount Rushmore if it's not Mount Everest, right? A household name and a household name for a reason. And that's why we're just honored to have them be an extension of our team and here today, coaching you all up. Lily's joining us from San Antonio. Rob's going to be running the show from his spot in New York. But Rob, why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about you guys before I spend a few minutes and ultimately hand it back to you.
Yeah, Matt, thank you so much for the opportunity. And folks, good to see you all. My name is Rob Franek. I'm editor-in-chief at the Princeton Review. As Matt and Lily know, I spend most of the academic year on the road talking to college-bound students and their parents and lots of counselors along the way. But the Princeton Review, for those of you who do not know us well, we're an education company. We are known for many things, from test preparation to college admission. And then, as Matt was saying, working with him and his team and filling out that financial aid expertise and paying for college expertise. So I'm really excited to be here today. Lily, I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lily Bruell, and I'm the Director of National Outreach for the Princeton Review, and I'm just glad to be joining y'all today. I'll be in the background monitoring the chat for Rob, and just know that if we don't answer your question right away, sometimes it's coming up in the presentation. And if we do not get to all of the questions, just because I know we have a healthy group of participants today, we will certainly follow up with you and share all the information through Matt on Tuesday. So thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. And before, again, we get into the bulk of the content that Rob's going to be leading the charge on today, I want to say a couple of things that I'll actually share in a second here. But obviously, there's been some massive shifts, specifically in the last couple of years, and test optional has become a lot more prevalent, especially with the pandemic and everything. But from where we sit in our expertise and our experience and really our visibility into outcomes with this whole process, it still matters. Okay, this stuff still matters. Your test scores will have an impact on admissions. They will have an impact on scholarships. Okay. Now, that said, some of you are probably, I don't want that to be demoralizing for some of you that might hear that and be like, well, my kid's not a good test taker despite best efforts and all that. And no problem. They may still, in fact, go test optional, but GPA matters. And GPA as a standalone at a lot of schools will translate to scholarships. And I'm going to show you exactly how that works in a second here. But I think that's really important message. And another thing that I want to just flag that is something that in my experience is not necessarily common knowledge, but we will always recommend that the families that we work with at least go down the path of taking the tests. Okay, whether it's SAT or ACT, I think it tends to be one or the other. I'll let Rob speak to that, but at a minimum to see how you do, give it best efforts, because it's very common that we'll say, hey, let's send the test scores to these 3 schools we're applying to, because you're actually at or above the average here. Whereas at these schools, you're not, so we're not going to send them there, right? And no problem, but at least we have that option. And I love just being able to have the option, right? If you're disappointed in your score, that's okay, but we still might use it. And I think that's a surprise to some people. So I just want to flag that. And again, just where some people I think are a little bit confused of, hey, you guys do financial aid and scholarships. What's that have to do with test prep and GPA? It has a ton to do with test prep and GPA, right? Now, if you haven't created your accounts already, guys, do it. I recommend you do it today. I'll put the link into the chat here, mycap.collegeaidpro.com, because the first thing that we're trying to help you do is figure out what's your EFCs, what are these schools actually going to cost you? We spent a lot of time yesterday talking about the fact that at many places, the sticker price is irrelevant and misleading. It's more about what am I going to pay? Am I going to get financial aid? Am I going to get scholarships? So create your account, put your inputs in here, and we're going to be able to tell you that for this Massachusetts family, this is an average income, average asset family of 4. It's going to be more expensive to go to the state school at UMass than it is to the $85,000 Amherst College because of their EFC, because of how generous Amherst is in meeting need. Again, that's a quick overview and how we want you leveraging your platform initially. But as it pertains to what Rob's going to talk about today, right? Your inputs are, we're going to ask you about what type of student you have. Do you have test scores? Do you have a GPA, right? And of course, some financial information. Even if you don't have that stuff or you're not sure, put it in there, because we're going to tell you, okay, for this student, are you going to get a merit-based scholarship at Belmont? Or obviously, I'm just picking a random school here. And then you can get some context as to the why. Here's their average GPA and test scores, and here's where my kid stacks up. So now I get why we're projecting a merit scholarship of X amount. Okay. The other thing that I want you to do is I want you to be able to, again, we teach you how to search for based on your admissions criteria, right? So if you want to be close to home and you think you want a small school and maybe you want to major in bio, okay, we can search based on that, but then we can filter just based on who's going to give my kid a scholarship that fits into that box, right? And maybe Wheaton wasn't on the map, but if they're going to give me this $40,000 scholarship, or Bennington's going to give me 40 grand off, I might want to take a closer look. But what I want you to think about and fool around with on the platform is if your GPA goes from a 3.3 to a 3.5, I promise you some of the schools you're looking at, it's going to show a different scholarship. If your ACT goes from a 26 to a 29, you're going to see you are going to get a different scholarship. So there's a real, I don't want you to put any more pressure on your kids. It's just more about educating to say these things matter, right? And you, again, put schools in there and fool around with your profile, and you will see different scholarships based on the GPA, based on the SAT. I don't want to take any more of your time, Rob, but I just think it's important to weave in from our perspective why this stuff matters, regardless of how competitive or not you view yourself as a student or view your student from the parent perspective.
Yeah, I know. I think it certainly sets the tone for the conversation, man. I so appreciate that. And I like the comparison between the Massachusetts family, between Amherst and UMass, and what a typical family could. I'll note that in my talk a bit when we talk about scholarships associated with SAT and ACT scores, but really well done.
Yeah, great.
All right. So folks, I think the floor is ours at Princeton Review. I want to thank you all again for coming. Again, my first name is Rob Franek. I'm editor-in-chief at the Princeton Review. Lily, I think I could put up I think I have my contact slide on the next one. So we'll just move to the next slide. And folks, we're here throughout the hour. As Lily said in her opening remarks, she's going to be my co-pilot throughout this. Do not feel that you're interrupting the soliloquy of today's conversation, volleying stuff our way. As Matt was saying, we're hoping that this will be an interactive discussion. I would love to hear all of your voices, but since we are blessed with so many of you here today, let's please use the chat. Don't feel like there's any dumb questions in regards to the SAT, ACT, how we use it in scholarship, how we use it in admission. I'll make sure that we try to focus on many of the things that we had promised you. I have a quick agenda on the next slide, but I just want to, before we move on to the next slide, I just want to note that I'm hoping today's conversation moves much further past just the 60 minutes that we're going to be spending together. My contact information is there. You'll get the full deck here, as Matt was saying, on Tuesday after the full series of events are done. You'll have my contact information, Lily's contact information. Please don't be bashful and volleying questions our way on these things as well. As I said before, I'm editor-in-chief. I'm responsible for content in a bunch of different channels at the Princeton Review. Our channel with Penguin Random House, we have a little over 150 books in publication. I work with content groups on the website and our product team, social media, PR and communications. But my real love, I have to say it out loud, is writing about college admission. I write a couple of different books and have for quite a few years now. Some of them are up there as well. I'll note some of them in the exchange that we have here moving forward, but you should know this. I own the copyright for all of the books that we're talking about today. I slug all of the information on our website for free. You can feel free to purchase the book, but you needn't do it if you prefer not to, since all of the information sits up on princetonreview.com. Again, I'll send you these links on Tuesday with the deck included. Lily, anything that I might have forgotten in those opening remarks?
No, I think we're good to go. We're already starting to get some in the chat, but a few of them you're going to be covering in the presentation. Just want to remind everyone in the chat, don't worry if we don't get to your question. It's probably going to be answered during the presentation itself. And for those of you who have student-specific questions, like about your specific student and for example, X or for example, Y, we'll also share with you our field marketing email address, and you can send those follow-up questions for more personalized answers.
Excellent.
That's it, Rob. Take it away.
Sounds good, Lily. Lily, we'll take a look at the agenda on the next slide. And folks, we broke up today's conversation into 3 different areas. How could we not have today's conversation without thinking about how colleges are viewing standardized tests? And of course, one of the biggest stressors for both students as well as their parents. And I know we have a lot of college counselors out there. I recognize you guys are on the front line answering these questions about how standardized tests are changing, specifically the SAT and its tectonic shift to a digital exam for those students that are right now in high school and sophomores. I know we have a lot of juniors with us today as well, but I suspect we're representing students from across spectrum. But we'll talk in granular detail about the digital SAT, how that will affect the ACT as well, and then of course AP exams. And then this third bucket, I think this is super important, and I suspect why many of you are joining us today. How are colleges themselves, colleges and universities, treating standardized tests? As Matt was saying in his opening remarks, and I cannot underscore this enough, in complete agreement with Matt, the SAT, the ACT to a slightly lesser degree, but growing AP exams are important not only for academic admission to so many schools, even test optional schools, and we'll go into some detail there, but also associating that with scholarship dollars, scholarship awards, crossing those 2 streams of GPA, SAT and ACT scores, and how is that factoring into your averages. Again, College Aid Pro doing an excellent job there and giving you the data that I think you're looking for. Lily, I'll look at the next slide, my friend, and then we'll tee up this part of the discussion. Actually, sorry, next slide after that one. Folks, I write a book called The Best 388 Colleges, and Lily, you could just click all these things and we'll just do the big reveal and we'll talk about each of them as we move on. Again, 388 colleges. Oh, just one more back, my friend. Sorry. 388 colleges. I put this up here. Again, you can get all this stuff for free on the website. But I put it up here because these are superlative colleges from across the country, many that I suspect you or your kids are going to be applying to in the next year or a couple of years, depending on your age group. I did a survey this past summer of each of the schools in this 388 schools. A little over 300 of those schools got back to us. These are deans and directors of admission. And we specifically asked them about how they are treating the SAT, the ACT, and AP exams. And what you're seeing on this slide is a different sort of definition structure, right? Different nomenclature around the test option or testing in general. Now, just to define these things, because I know myself, Lily, Matt, we are steeped in this stuff every day, but parents and of course students are just learning many of these terms as well. We would be living under a virtual rock if we didn't understand the word test optional, which most of schools, because of the pandemic, have become test optional over the last 3 years of time. But even if we were having today's conversation in 2019, pre-pandemic, there were still 1,000, actually a little over 1,000 out of the 3,000 plus four-year colleges in the States that were already test optional. But COVID increased that opportunity for schools across the states, across the globe. Now, I bring this up because test optional, and I tell this to all of my students at Princeton Review, and there are a lot of them. We had a little over 1.4 million college-bound students come through our queue, but I tell every one of them that test optional does not mean test prohibited. Test optional does not mean test prohibited. So if you're submitting your score to a test optional school, they can still and do use that score for academic admission. And as Matt was saying, for scholarship awards. We're going to come back to that point because it's a super important one for us to feel expert in the next hour of time. There are, of course, let's look at the definitions on the right-hand side of your screen. Test required, that's self-explanatory. This means that, the MITs of the world who reinstated their SAT and ACT requirement in May of 2022. So if we were the seniors, or if there's a couple seniors with us today, or parents of seniors, the SAT is now required at MIT, University of Florida. There are 6% of schools across the country. You can see this. Test flexible. You may hear this term. This simply means that a school, colleges, and universities require a test, but it could be the SAT or ACT. But if you choose not to submit that, you might submit another exam. The obvious choices are going to be AP exams because the subject test for AP went away for a couple years ago. Now, we already talked about test optional, and we'll go into more detail there. Test free. This simply means that if you were applying to a school and they were test free, they would do away with considering your SAT and ACT scores if you submitted them. So a good example of test-free schools are University of California, the entire system, and the Cal State system. So as Matt was saying, I live in New York, so the SUNY system, the State University of New York, and the Cal State system are the biggest state systems in the States, but the UC and Cal State system have now become test-free, meaning that you couldn't submit your SAT and ACT scores as we moved on. Lily, let's take a look at that next slide, my friend. I think this sums up just this, and then we'll move on. So 93% across schools across the country will consider your SAT and ACT scores if you submit them. And again, my logic is very similar to, actually, I think a carbon copy of what Matt was saying at the beginning of in his opening remarks, that for students at the beginning of the process, if you're sophomores, if you're early in your junior year, wherever you are in your junior year, taking the SAT or the ACT is important for two reasons. One, you will have a score to submit should you choose to submit them. If you're proud of your SAT and ACT scores, you can submit them. And if you're not, if you feel like they are not representative of your ability, particularly in knowing where that school is in the pecking order of things from competitiveness, then you can exercise your test optional to withhold the information from that school. So the decision becomes yours rather than a student that simply didn't take the SAT or ACT would only be applying to schools that would simply be test optional or completely test free. We're going to come back to this point because it's an important one to make. Lily, I'm happy to take questions on this. Again, folks, don't be bashful in volleying questions my way. But Lily, I'll look to you to just on each of these beats to volley those questions. If not, then we'll just move to the next slide, my friend.
So we're already getting a couple questions, but maybe you could just give some high level, the usual questions. What is a competitive ACT or SAT score? And maybe you can give a quick definition of super scoring because it's already coming up.
Absolutely. Let's start with the super scoring because that's, I think, important to this group. Super scoring simply means that if you took 2 administrations of the ACT exam, which with its 4 compulsory sections, a super score means the school itself will pick and choose the most competitive of those 4 different sections of the ACT, right? So if you took the exam twice, they're going to pick the best score and put you into the best light. Hence, they super scored your 2 ACT. The same logic works for SAT as well. Now, this is super important for 2 reasons. Number one, the vast majority of colleges and universities across the states will simply super score for students. The ACT had mentioned this a couple of years ago that we're going to do it automatically. They've since rescinded that offer, at least temporarily. But we know that schools, for 2 reasons, want to do this. One, they want to put you in the best light academically because it's going to be a benefit to you as a student applicant or your kids as student applicants. But number two, and this is the less altruistic way of looking at it, but ultimately that school has to report out their mean SAT and ACT scores to folks like me at the Princeton Review or the folks at US News, and they're never going to report their second best ACT or SAT score. So you're always going to want to super score and put that student and school into the best light. And Lily, the second question was about, I'm sorry, can you say that second question again?
Sure. We were talking about super scoring, and then if you could just give the
what's a good
baseline
SAT and ACT score? Remember, yeah. So folks, and this is going to sound like I'm punting the answer to this question, but a good SAT or ACT score is simply based on the school that you're applying to, right? And we're gonna talk about this. If a school's average or mean for the ACT is a 32, it's a super competitive school because the maximum score that you can get on the ACT is a 36. So we have to think about that. Schools change. Schools are different in their level of competitiveness. So one of the things that I put on our website, and of course in many of our books at Princeton Review, is what does that mean? So here's the thing. If I have a couple of assignments exiting our conversation today, look up the 3 or 4 schools that you might have up in your noggins right now that you or your kids might be considering, and look to see on our website or on Matt's website where that mean is, because that will determine what that mean is for that school and what you might consider a mean at another school. So again, it is all based on the schools that you're applying to. Lily, I'll look to another question unless you want to move on. Okay. Sorry, folks, I have one school. I'm just going to beat up on Cornell here. And Lily, you could just put the whole slide up there. I think there are 2 more. Okay, perfect. Oh, I'm sorry. Just to go back. So Cornell University, I tell my own students this, and I'm putting this up here for just a little comic relief, but also to just underscore how schools, colleges, universities across the states are treating the SAT or ACT, right? So Cornell University at the beginning of the pandemic started a test optional temporary movement, right? So Cornell is one of the 8 Ivies, super competitive, obviously, and they have now extended it to 4 years. And it's likely that many schools across the country are going to continue to extend that temporary test optional status. But my point in putting up this slide is this. It is literally the Wild West out there on how colleges and universities are explaining their relationship to test optional and the test themselves. I'm just going to read this one to you. I don't like it when speakers read slides to people, but this is literally too good not to read. This is from the admission office directly at Cornell. We anticipate that many students who will have had reasonable and uninterrupted opportunities to take the ACT and SAT will continue to submit results, and those results will continue to demonstrate preparation for college level work. Now, folks, I put this up here because it might send a shiver of fear right down your spine. That is not the intention, but what is the intention is to say it out loud. Cornell right now is not bear hugging their embrace of a test optional movement. What Cornell is saying in this quote is that if you have the ability to take the SAT or ACT, then you better take it, right? Because they are saying that it continues to demonstrate preparation for college level work. Do I agree with this? No. Do you agree with this? Likely not. But the truth is, it doesn't matter what we agree with or not. We have to base our decisions on facts. We have to base our decisions on what individual schools are telling us around their comfort and embrace, in this case, embrace of an SAT or ACT test optional policy, right? So this is an encyclopedic job of myself and Lily, and of course, Matt's team at College Aid Pro, and of course, your counselors back at home. So again, we collect all of this information. Happy to share this with you on an individual basis. It's all over our website, but I think it's a good one. Lily, if there's a question on that, if not, then I'll move on, my friend. All right, so we'll just take a look at that next slide. Okay, we'll just keep it right there. Excellent. So folks, in thinking about, let's just switch our focus. Let us think of ourselves as college admission professionals, right? I'm an old college counselor I worked at a school right here in New York City for quite a few years on the admission side of the fence. Let's just say it out loud. How college admission teams are considering our applications if we're students or if we're representing our kids, if we're parents on the call today, we have to know that there's a rubric that each admission team goes through. And each rubric, now we're saying, listen, you can assign this on a 1 to 10 basis, but schools are all different on how they assign weighting and value around each of the component parts of your application or your kid's application, right? So you get awarded points or something on the rubric for your college recommendations for, of course, as Matt was saying, and can't stress this enough, the biggest driver of your application, value of your application, the most important piece is going to be your high school GPA, the rigor of your courses, but still a second, very close second, even in our test optional times, is performance on standardized tests. The SAT and the ACT being the grail, right? So we're just putting a 1 to 10 rubric here in assigning a grading system. But what I want you to take away from this chart is that college admission teams, even at test optional schools, are considering your SAT and your ACT as one component of the way that they're evaluating you as an applicant. And this is an important thing for you to go forward and start making that decision around the importance of the SAT and ACT on the schools that you might be applying to, or the schools that you think are going to value that SAT more than others. Lily, I'll move on to the next one because I think it's a student comparison that might be valuable. Okay, and we'll just leave it right there for right now. Thinking about, again, wearing our hats of college admission folks, we have to know that college admission counselors from colleges and universities across the country are all considering students and thinking about all the things that come to the table. Let us just diffuse some myths out there. There is literally nothing that college admission teams are not going to see when they evaluate your application. We just did a Washington Post article, just came out on Thursday, which I will send to you on Tuesday as well, talking about students' social media imprint and how that plays into the college admission process. But to keep it simple today, we understand that GPA and rigor of your courses, AP courses, what a student's doing outside the classroom, your essays, recommendations, you can read this just as well as I can. What I need you to take away from students A and B is that these students are super close to one another, right? They've gone to a competitive high school, they've achieved well from a GPA perspective, they've challenged themselves with some of the most challenging courses on their offer to them. They are active, they're Renaissance students, right? Throughout, they've risen to leadership positions with every college and university is going to consider, should you apply to them. Their essays are near equal, they have equal letters of recommendation. But here's the thing, and Lily, I think we could just hit it one more time. The point of this slide is thinking about how test scores are going to differentiate students in the process, right? So student A and student B are near identical in most ways that are super important in the college admission process. But student B has submitted an SAT score and student A has not. Now let's just say this out loud. Colleges, the vast majority of whom are test optional, as we noted in one of our first slides, those schools cannot penalize a student like student A for not submitting a test score, but they can still consider a student like student B that has submitted a test score. And this is the question, this is the choice that you and your families, you and your kids are making over the next year or years of time, depending on your age group. Should I submit an SAT or ACT score or withhold it? And again, thinking back to our original direction, to me, you must take an SAT or ACT. I think students prepping for the SAT and ACT is a good idea because they tend to do dramatically better once they prep, but there is value in considering one more point of differentiation between student A and B. We're going to come back to this point. We're going to look at some other things. But Lily, I'll look to you. I know I see a lot of questions popping up here, so I'll just look to you, my friend, and you direct me on how best to either to answer those questions now or just move on.
Sure. I think real briefly, do you want to just talk about what the PSAT is and how it works?
Of course, yeah. The PSAT, and there's so many acronyms in college admission, or in high school. But the PSAT is the preliminary SAT, right? It is essentially a practice SAT. Now, the important thing about the PSAT are two. Number one, the biggest and most important thing is that a student will actually be tested in a practice in a preliminary environment. So the questions themselves read very much like a true SAT test. And this is of great value because what I talk to my own students about at the Princeton Review is that, let's say when you take a class with us, you're going to take 4 full-length SAT or ACT throughout your time. And each time that you take it, you're going to be more familiar with that exam. Not just the questions themselves, but the question types, right? The instructions, you're going to be familiar with how to take that test in a timed environment. So the more you can take a practice or preliminary PSAT or just a practice test on your own, you're going to be like a tiger for test preparation, because you're going to be ready to pounce on that test once it comes in. And there's not one thing on that test that you will not have seen before. And that is the real value of the preliminary SAT. The second value of the PSAT, is that it drives national merit qualifiers, right? So national merit scholars, you'll be familiar with some of these words. And the most superlative set of those students that score the best on PSATs are those national merit scholars. Some of them earn a scholarship dollar, but it's a very small percentage up at the top. But the value is that students that get it, that national merit, get another accolade that they could add to their list of student A or student B. You're a national merit qualifier, right? You're a national merit scholar. And that's spurred by your performance on the PSAT. So that's the simplest way I know how to explain it.
You're good. Some other questions are coming up, so we're going to hold off.
Sure. Okay. Then we'll take a look. Okay. Changes on the SAT. Now, I know we have a lot of juniors in this room, but I know we have a lot of sophomores in there as well. So if you're a sophomore or younger, please understand this. The SAT for you is going to change deeply. So the pencil and paper test that parents took, that literally anybody that's a junior and above or older has taken over the last, since 1926, when the SAT was created, it took a pencil and paper SAT. That is now going away. And it's important that we understand this. The SAT is going digital, it's not going online. And this might feel like splitting words or splitting hairs here, but the truth is it's not. The thing, we'll just wait there for 1 second. For the digital exam, the platform that students will be taking this new exam on, if Wi-Fi is interrupted, if you lose power, the answer choices, or pardon me, the work that you've progressed along for the couple hours that you're there will be captured, right? So if you were, or parents had kids that were at the height of the pandemic, juniors, and they were taking their first AP exams in May and June of 2020, those exams went completely online, but there was significant difficulty, problems with Wi-Fi, problems with hardware that students had, and maybe they just didn't have the right laptop or tablet to use on those things. Those things are going away with the new digital app created by the College Board who creates all things SAT. The other huge things to remember, and Lily has that up here on the slide, it goes from a 3-hour exam, the pencil and paper test that we all know and hate, but the 3-hour exam to a 2-hour exam. And Lily, we'll just put up the other quick animation here just to talk about it. So the sections will become shorter. We understand that there'll be fewer questions and there's reduced testing fatigue, right? So if we just look at those first two, the two on opposite sides of the spectrum here, shorter sections and reduced testing fatigue. Folks, I have been a test prep teacher for many years, as well as we have many folks that have taught the SAT and ACT at Princeton Review. But the truth is, a 3-hour exam is difficult for anybody, right? So if you're a student or you're representing your students, your kids' parents from back at home, but the truth is a 3-hour test is hard just because of the fatigue, let alone the content of the questions. So we know there's going to be fewer questions, but there is a difference in why those questions are going from a 3-hour test to a 2-hour test. The test will now become adaptive. So if parents are out there and you took a GRE or a GMAT or the LSAT over the last nearly 30 years of time, those tests are most of them are done online, digitally, and they're also adaptive exams. So the important thing to remember is that with adaptive exams, as you start to answer questions correctly, the next questions that you'll see on those tests will become more difficult. The inverse happens as well, right? So if you've done poorly on a couple of those first questions on the SAT, the next questions that you will see will likely become easier. So the point is, and this is an important point before we talk about the content, the SAT itself will be fewer questions, but the questions themselves will be weighted differently than they are today. So just to look at the sections, there are currently on the pencil and paper SAT, 3 sections, right? Reading and writing and language and math. Those are the 3 sections. There is a combination now, as you can see here on the screen, a reading and writing section and a math section. Again, they're combined into 2 modules. You can read this just as well as I can. those first 25 questions with 2 warm-up questions or practice questions, and then you're moving to the second module. So as I talked about before, the questions that you're seeing between the first module and the second module, based on how well you do on the first, will either be easier or more difficult or easier based on your performance on the first module. So again, this is important because it changes the way that students will think and perform on the SAT. And I'll just give you a quick example. When I teach my own classes at the Princeton Review, I tell all of my students in this current day in the pencil and paper format, there are no extra points on the pencil and paper SAT for answering the most difficult question or the easiest questions. All questions are created equal when it comes to points. So the obvious strategy is to answer all the easy questions on the SAT first and then use the extra time that you saved in focusing on the hard ones towards the end. That strategy goes out the window with this adaptive nature of the test. But our job, as we can cry about it, doesn't matter. But the truth is, our job is to understand how these tests are structured and how we as students or our families are going to work with our kids throughout the process as we move forward. So again, 2 modules, fewer questions, they're going to be weighted differently. I think that's the easiest way to explain it, Lillian, and then we'll move on, my friend. But volley questions my way as we move on.
We have a bunch of eager questions about AP and IB. So if everyone,
okay, great.
We're coming up on it.
So close, we're so close. Okay, I promised to talk just a little bit about the ACT, and this is a relatively quick slide. And Lily, you could put up the three different things. I think that's the last one. Excellent. So for the ACT, now again, it's the Hatfields and McCoys of testing. You get to choose whether you want to take the SAT or you want to take the ACT or you want to take both. And just to think about pre-pandemic numbers, in 2019, about 2.2 million students took the SAT, about 1.9 million students took the ACT, and about 472,000 students took both exams. So again, you have free will to take any of those exams, or you can take both of those exams. Now, ACT in 2019, pre-pandemic, had announced that they would become a computer-based test, not adaptive, but a computer-based test. Because of the pandemic, they rescinded that offer. So now the ACT will still be a pencil and paper test, and that is for the foreseeable future. And just let's say this out loud for parents, particularly in our virtual room today, we should just note that the SAT and the ACT, since their inception, have continued to change. This digital SAT is just another change that has happened to the SAT. It is not a singular change that has happened. The test continues to change, right? The last time the SAT changed was in 2016, and now in 2023, it is changing for international students first, and then 2024 for the rest of the students across the globe. But ACT will likely follow suit. And if history proves true, and you might be thinking this as a student or a parent or a family or even counselors, if history proves true, 2 things will happen. Because of the advent of the digital SAT, students will either flock to the current pencil and paper test that's available right now, or they will flock to the next exam in town, the ACT. And that will likely happen for at least a little while. But the College Board, who creates all things SAT and all things AP exams, we're going to talk about that, but creates all things SAT, is banking that 2-hour exam is going to be more appealing than the 3-hour ACT. And they're going to focus on pushing that test and making it available during your school day rather than just a Saturday. I'm going to make sure that I stay in contact with Matt and all of you guys as we move forward. We're going to get more and more detail on that as the College Board gives out more and more detail. But it's important to understand the difference between the SAT and ACT just from an availability and a structural standpoint. Lily, I'll look to the next slide. Okay, let's just talk about AP exams here. There's a lot of numbers on the screen. Let me just summarize this for you specifically. AP exams have exploded in growth rate, certainly over the last 20 or 30 years of time. So if parents are out there and they're in my age group, let's just look at the mid-90s through the 2000s, when we start to think about those students in that group and the explosion of those exams over the last 20 years or 20 plus years of time, this is important. AP exams are not yet required for the majority of schools, but not yet required as the SAT and ACT are at so many schools, or test optional in that regard. but they are quickly becoming the most popular tests on the globe for this simple reason. They test content mastery, right? You're mastering that academic discipline that you are being tested on in the AP exam. I tell all of my students in the SAT and ACT courses, and we all do it at Princeton Review, the SAT and ACT do not test you on how smart you are. The SAT and ACT test you on how well you take the SAT and ACT, right? And that's why test prep is so effective, because you can focus on strategy to do well on that question, on those tests. When I teach, and when we teach APP tests at the Princeton Review, which we do for many tests at the Princeton Review, these are based on your content knowledge, right? There's no quick tricks to master an AP exam. It is simply your knowledge, your deep and important knowledge of each of those subjects. So if we're doing a little predictive analysis, and I suspect this is on your mind as well, AP exams are growing not only in popularity, but they are likely growing in importance when it comes to their value in the in the admission market. So Lily, we could just put up the quick animations on this slide. I think I probably hit these points as well, but dramatic growth, 324% more exams out there. So you can see this, and this just makes it painfully clear that AP exams, and I think this is a coup for it. I think this is great. AP exams are continuing to grow in popularity, and they will likely, and this is where the predictive stuff comes in, they will likely become more valuable as we move forward. And we see what happens around the shakiness that the SAT and ACT have provided over the last 3 years of the pandemic. This is super important. And I think we have a good slide on this next one, Lily. Let's just take a quick peek. Okay, so back to these students A and B. Now, we talked about this a couple minutes ago, and we said student A and B are almost essentially the same until we got down to those last 3 rows, right? We said student A decided to withhold their SAT or ACT, or just not take it, not submit it, certainly not. But student B added in their score of 1340. But now those same students are adding AP exams to their list. So we know we're capturing the AP courses. We know how students are doing in those AP courses, but now we will see likely what the scores are that they're achieving from a grading perspective, from the 1 to 5 scale of the AP tests. So we know another factor in the college process is going to be AP exams and students' performance, not only in the classroom, because that answers your GPA, but also on the tests themselves. And this, to me, my friends, if you're taking away just a couple of nuggets from today's conversation, this is a super important one. AP exams and their lasting value in the process and their effect on academic admission and scholarship dollar awards later on. Lily, I know you said that there are some questions on AP, my friend, so I'll look to you if there are things that we can talk about there.
Yeah, there's quite a few. If you can't just touch on AP scoring, so, the scores don't automatically get sent. It's very similar to your SAT score, you choose to send it. And then folks were asking, like, if there are no AP classes available at your student's school, are honors classes weighed the same? And then we do have a couple of people in the chat asking also about IB. So yes, I don't know if you want to touch on the difference.
I'll totally touch on IB as well, absolutely. But let's talk, so we'll talk about the AP. The first thing, that question that you talked about, what if no courses are available in my high school? And this is an excellent question. So thank you, whoever volleyed, or the many folks that volleyed that question. It is unlikely that every student, it's impossible, that every student at every high school across the states is going to have the same AP resource, the same AP classes taught at their high school, right? Now, students A and B may have, right? I mean, at their schools. But the truth is, based on your school and school district, they may place more or less weight on AP exams. It might be offering more or less AP exams as a result. But the truth is that a student can still sit for an AP exam, even if they didn't sit for a formal AP European history course in their junior year in high school or their sophomore year in high school, right? So we understand that there's flexibility to take those tests, even if you haven't taken a formal AP exam. Now, that puts obviously some accountability on the student and the parent. And this is stuff that we do at Princeton Review. We teach and tutor for AP tests to get students prepared for those tests. So it's supplemental in what they're learning in school, AP exam or honors course, or if they just want to learn along in a book or with a tutor or teacher. So we have those resources for you. Lily, if you could put that in the chat, maybe that'd be a good link to put up there, our AP stuff. But don't feel like you're being penalized if your school doesn't offer those courses, because there are other ways to get to those test scores. Lily, that's the question I copied down, and you had another one, and I'm so sorry I didn't.
Just real quick, the difference between that and IB, and then I'll keep us going.
Yeah, so for IB, and for those folks that are not in IB schools, the International Baccalaureate, the IB International Baccalaureate, the IB degree and/or courses that some schools offer. Now, this is an excellent question, because many competitive schools across the states may likely offer an AP curriculum, but they may also offer an IB curriculum. They are not mutually exclusive. So students can choose one track or another, depending on your school, but the IB degree that a student will earn is of great value because it is global, right? It is truly international, as the I stands for. So we understand that those IB degrees are valuable. They are valuable universally in the admission process, no matter where a student applies. And they are just as powerful as AP exams are and the results of those AP exams. But there are fewer schools that offer IB exams or IB curricula rather than just an AP exam and AP curriculum as we move forward. So that is the difference. From a challenge perspective, did a student challenge themselves throughout high school to earn that GPA that we see with students A and B? The answer is absolutely yes. You're checking off the most competitive boxes, whether you're moving through the AP route or through the IB route. So that ticks off that box. And then the curb appeal from a student perspective with IB and AP are near universal, but slightly more universal with IB because of the international component. Lynn, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think we're good if you want to keep going through, and then I'm sure we'll have some questions left over.
Absolutely. And I know I'm yapping on here, so please just, folks, volley your questions our way. As Lily said, I want to make sure that we stay connected as well as we move forward. So don't feel like the conversation is going to end just after the next hour. Okay. And Lily, I think we'll just put up this graph. I mentioned this before, just to talk about the SAT and ACT and test takers, right? The pandemic, all you need to know about this slide is that 2020, we factor in a global pandemic, and there is a cratering in both the SAT and the ACT test takers across the board. Now, this is based on 2021 numbers. We are just looking at the 2022 numbers, so it's likely ratcheting up, but we're going to show you this as we move forward. 2021, these were students that were taking the SAT and ACT, trying to take the SAT and ACT in 2020, so these numbers are super low. It is continuing to ratchet up, and we're going to see what those results are in the next year or so. Lily, we'll take a look at the next one. Okay, this is an important slide. I do a survey at the Princeton Review. Lily, you might have access to this one in the chat. It's called College Hopes and Worries. Folks might want to geek out with me on that one as well, but it's a survey, annual survey. We've now been doing it for 20 years at Princeton Review for for understanding high school students and their parents' hopes and fears around the college process. I'm putting it up there because one of the questions that we asked was what exam do you think that you're going to take? So you can see here that we have most students wanting to take the SAT or a combination of the SAT or ACT, or the measly-ish 14% that are taking the ACT. Now, if I were ACT and I was looking at the slide, I'd be a little nervous. But the truth is that from an admission standpoint, both exams are treated exactly the same, right? So if you were looking at schools 25 or 30 years ago, which I suspect many families might be, there was a myth then, and it's a myth now. And the myth was that only schools, colleges and universities on the left and right coast accepted the SAT, and all schools in the great middle of the country accepted the ACT. It was wrong then, it's wrong now. Schools do not care whether you're submitting the SAT or ACT or both. We already beat down the idea of super scoring to put you into the best light and put that school into the best light. So again, just to factor this in. Lily, I'll look to the next slide and I'll make sure that we're respectful of everybody's time. Okay, now Matt had said this at the beginning, and I was so pleased about this. When thinking about scholarship and when thinking about academic admission, we've already really talked about this idea of test optional, and that it doesn't mean test prohibited in college admission, and that the majority of the 3,000 schools out there that are test optional will still consider your SAT and ACT scores for academic admission. However, many of those same schools, not all, but many, will also consider or want to receive your SAT or ACT scores if you want to qualify for scholarship dollars. And folks, I cannot underscore this enough. The SAT and ACT are important not only for academic admission, but if you want to be awarded scholarship dollars. Folks, how can we not talk about this today? But one of the nuggets that you must take forward for our conversation this afternoon is that idea of making sure you're asking the question of our SAT and ACT scores tied to scholarship awards. And that's something that College Aid Pro does incredibly well because they have that data set. We have that data set at Princeton Review as well. So just to keep it in mind, if you're applying to any of those schools, then they're no longer test optional because you're going to be required to submit those test scores for those awards. I beat that point down, Lily. We'll just move on, my friend. I think this might be our last one. Folks, I'm hoping, and I'm going to open this up for the full Q&A for the last couple minutes. But folks, this process, I'm hoping that this is of value to you, but please know that this process is knowable and navigable. I tell this to all of my students. If the SAT and the ACT or AP exams are the thing bothering you, don't put it out of your mind. The SAT and ACT are knowable and navigable, just as the AP exams. I hope that we can be your partners in that regard. The things that scare us, the things that make us nervous, whether it's getting scholarship awards, whether that's taking standardized tests, whether it's navigating and finding a school that's the best fit for us, all of those things are knowable and navigable. Ourselves, folks at Princeton Review, and the folks at College Aid Pro are experts in this area. I'm really hoping that this conversation will continue well past today. Lily, I'll look to you for questions, and then Matt's going to take.
Yeah, we're 5 till, so I want to be respectful of Matt's time. I am going to put here in the chat our field marketing inbox. There were quite a few questions for parents, and unfortunately, we just didn't have the time to go into everyone's circumstances.
Okay.
But you can absolutely email us, and we can still follow up with you and give you answers to your more specific questions. So I'm just going to pop that right here in the chat, and then Matt will send over on Tuesday all the resources from our presentation. So you'll have links. You don't have to copy and paste all the resources Rob mentioned in the presentation. The links will also be included there. So thank you. And sorry we couldn't answer every single question, but I went ahead and dropped it in the chat so people can absolutely email us and we'll get you a response.
Yeah, just a few parting thoughts. Awesome job, Rob. I learned a ton there. So thanks just for myself personally. Some great notes here that I'm going to pass on to my team too. And like these guys said, I think the hope here and one of the main gets for us for today and just this kind of week in general is that this is, I know some of you have been in our ecosystem for a little bit, but for those of you that are new, this is just the beginning of hopefully some type of relationship, partnership, whatever, but just leverage us in whatever capacity you need. This is what we do. This is what I think we're pretty good at. I know that we both have really robust, great free resources and constant education all the way up through obviously more personalized kind of paid services. We'll make sure that you have details on both ends of the spectrum and everything in between. And again, you just know where to find us. And I want to, again, just tie it back to where we started. And I think Rob really hammered home these points that as you are looking at colleges, and as a matter of fact, just throw out a college, put in the chat some of the colleges that you're looking at, and we can get an idea of how we look at these. I'll see one in my backyard here, a very popular one at that, Northeastern.
Oh, sure.
The university of my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and both of my parents, and none of us kids even applied there. I don't know if there was some like built-in rebellion there or something. I don't know what it was, because obviously an amazing school, but we can, if we want to drill down to these guys again, we can see, are we getting need-based financial aid? Are we getting scholarships for this particular student? We're not projecting any merit-based scholarships, but for every school in the country, we have all the scholarships that they offer and the qualifications for each. And again, we're pretty good at telling you, what are you going to get? And then again, we try to give you some context. Why? Here's the average test scores. Obviously very competitive at Northeastern is this, they continue to just soar in popularity every single year. Very competitive GA, right? And we can also get an idea of, well, when they do give, very generous with need-based financial aid, as we're showing here. But when they do give scholarships, they can be pretty generous, on average, just under $20,000. So we want to make sure that you leverage this. Everybody has access to the free platform. If you want to upgrade to all the bells and whistles, use this. Let me put the code in the chat here, Bootcamp 24. That will give you 20% off, right? So for example, the free version of the platform, it only allows you to put 3 schools in there. You don't get access to the private scholarship search engine or that advanced search that I showed you there. But if you want full access, you can do that. Just you can put upgrade here or talk to an expert. And that allows you, if you want, and I think for a lot of people, especially as you're starting this process, Our valedictorian option it gives you free access, or not free, gives you access, full access to the platform for the year. And you can book an hour and meet with one of our experts, right? And for example, we had the director of financial aid at Harvard and MIT join us. And those are some of the folks you can meet with if you want, or myself or anybody on our team. And that's usually, again, especially as you get started, a great place to answer the questions, where do we start? That's oftentimes what we get at the beginning is like, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed, and it's kind of paralysis by analysis. Do we start test scores? Do we start thinking about our financial aid eligibility? Do we start shopping for schools and putting our list together? And especially if we are maybe a divorced or separated family or a business owner, some of these other variables that add to the complexity. That's what I would recommend. Take an hour, meet with one of us. It'll give you full access to the platform. We can point you down the right path for what we do best. But I think for a lot of people, it's very common, and I think in most cases a really good investment, that you work with somebody like ourselves that does what we do best, and you also have the other coaches and resources for what they do best. And I say it all the time, it sucks to think about spending money, especially as you're staring at these $85,000 costs. But I think these are worthwhile investments. And for us, specifically the test prep, you can see, do it yourself. If I get this score versus this score, what does that translate to in terms of scholarship opportunities? This GPA versus this GPA, how does that translate? So I think obviously the mindset is there's to be had here, right? And yes, nobody likes to spend money, but you're investing and feel so strongly that in making some investments up front, and as you tackle this process, you are going to see a return on. And it's a lot, and it is complex, and it is overwhelming, and it is expensive. Obviously, I'm biased here. I have something to gain by people investing in us and our firm, but I believe in what we do, and I believe in the investments, and I believe in having partners like the Princeton Review. So again, it was awesome having you guys on. Really grateful. I think that was amazing information for everybody that's a part of our ecosystem, and I look forward to doing it again with you guys.
Sounds good.
Awesome rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks,
Take care,
folks.
everybody.
You well.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
I'm sorry, I'm just putting the website in here again here. Lily, you can duck out whenever you need to, pal, but I can stick around and just put the website in here.
All right, no worries. I was just answering a couple of the last minute questions, but
Yeah, you do your thing. I don't want to cut anybody off if you're in the middle of something here, so you tell me.
no, that's all good. I've answered the bulk of the ones that I could, like I was trying to go through pretty quickly on some of the easy ones. But yeah, the field marketing is the way to go, and we'll have, that way they can get answers from actual advisors too. So it's
Right.
more specific.
Right.
I'll send you everything.
Great
Thanks
rest
for
of your
having
day.
us.
Listen, when you come up to Salem, don't forget to use me as a resource.
Absolutely. The recording's going to be emailed to you, Daniel, on Tuesday.
On Tuesday, and then everybody tomorrow, make sure you tune in. We're going to talk about private scholarships tomorrow with Jocelyn Pearson from the private scholarship system. Hope to see you tomorrow.
Perfect.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.